Chapter 9, Reality Check, Part 2. The next day went pretty similar to the previous one, up to the point when Luz started her homework, but couldn't finish it because the ringing phone on the nightstand behind her interrupted her in the middle of it. It didn't take long for her to realize that it wasn't actually her own phone, but Amity's. Luz wasn't sure if Amity had left it there on purpose, or if she'd just forgotten it because of how upset and distracted she'd been, but it was sitting there on the bedside table now, ringing, and Luz was contemplating what to do. She knew she probably should have left it alone, but when she looked at the contact and saw it was Edric, a surge of anger got a hold of her, and she picked up. "Amity, listen, She didn't let him finish. Amity isn't here right now. She surprised herself with how cold her voice sounded. It took a lot for Luz to get mad at someone, but when she did, she got really mad. She threatened to unfriend them if they ever hurt Amity with their actions for a reason. And they had. Emma especially. Amity whispering, "I asked them to do it." At the back of her mind did nothing to soothe Luz when all she could think of was her friend falling to pieces in her arms. The screen slowly faded from black into a picture of both Blight twins sitting on one of the outhouse's couches. "Oh, hi, Luz." Emma sounded completely deflated with just the tiniest hint of relief in her voice over not having to face Amity right now. She wasn't sure if she'd ever be able to face her sister again after everything she said to her. "If she's not with you right now, can you at least tell us how she's doing?" Luz crossed her arms and stared her down. "How do you think she's doing after what you did to her?" she hissed. "What is wrong with you? You know exactly how much school means to Amity. How could you do this to her?" Emra, who was usually so much taller than Luz, shrunk into herself and suddenly seemed very small, eyes focusing on the floor. Her brother gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, then turned back to Luz. "You think she doesn't know that? You think we haven't spent the last 2 days beating ourselves up about it?" He looked Luz directly in the eyes, sounding more desperate than mad. And for the first time since they started talking, Luz noticed how exhausted he looked. And Emma looked even worse. She was on the brink of tears. "Listen, it's not that we don't appreciate you looking out for Mittens. We really do. But yelling at Em isn't helpful right now. Okay?" Luz's anger melted away. "I'm sorry, She hadn't meant to make anyone cry." Emma shook her head. "Don't apologize. You were just protecting Amity. I'm glad she has someone in her life that cares as much about her as you do. And you're right. I deserve to be yelled at for what I said to her." "Maybe. Probably. But Edric's also right. It doesn't help anyone." Luz looked away, clenching her hands around the phone just a little too hard. "I'm just scared. I've never seen her this shattered before." Edric gulped. "It's that bad, huh?" "It's like Amity said," Emma mumbled. "We know how to make her hurt like no one else can." It went really quiet after that, neither of them facing the other until finally, Edric looked back up at Luz. "Luz, listen to me, okay? Something happened. We really need to talk to Amity." There was something so haunted in his expression and the way he spoke that it took Luz's breath away. "It's not the kind of thing that I could just tell her if you told me, is it?" The twins shook their heads. "She can't hear it from anyone else. It's something she needs to hear from us." Emma's voice was quiet and extremely deflated. "But not right now. Not when she's still reeling from what I did to her." Edric's voice was kind and understanding, but there was also something stern in his tone. Emma shook her head intently, then turned to look at Luz. Just promise me you'll be there with her when we tell her, okay?" Luz nodded. "Okay, I promise," she said without hesitation. She was scared. She wasn't sure what was going on, but whatever it was, it sounded terrible, especially since the twins seemed so serious when mentioning it. As long as Luz had known them, the twins had never been serious about anything. Emerald gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." Finishing her homework with whatever that call had been in mind turned out to be difficult for Luz. Her mind kept wandering to all kinds of horror scenarios about whatever the twins had to tell Amity that was this bad. And she was pretty sure she took 3 times as long to finish her homework as it would have taken her otherwise. And also that half of math was probably solved wrong because of how unfocused she'd been. But she didn't care much. At least she finished up by the time she heard the front door open, even if just barely. She spent the next half an hour cooking dinner with her mom, who seemed pretty stressed today too, while Amity was occupied with reading a book Luz had lent her. "Are you done with your homework?" Camila asked suddenly when she was done chopping the vegetables. "Yeah, why?" Amity is still really down, and today was extremely stressful for her. The guy we talked to at City Hall basically probed her like she was some criminal rather than a scared 14-year-old. Camila shook her head, still in complete disbelief about that happening. "So, I was thinking, maybe you could take her out somewhere to take her mind off of everything?" "I'd love to, if she feels up for it." Luz cocked her head. "Why do you look like you have something in mind already?" "Well, remember how there's a new Azora movie playing in cinemas right now? I was thinking maybe you could go see it when it's on in 2 hours." Camila had noticed one of the promotional posters in the city earlier, and since she knew that both girls liked the franchise, she had looked up when the movie was playing next as soon as she'd gotten home. "Really? Can we?" Luz had completely forgotten about the movie release because of everything that was going on, but the thought of seeing it with Amity made her super excited, and she was pretty sure it could actually work. "That's a great idea! That might be the thing to cheer her up!" Of course, it wouldn't magically poof all their problems away, and Luz couldn't imagine Amity would ever completely stop being scared for her grades in her future until she was back in the bowling aisles, which was completely understandable. But if Luz could at least cheer her up a little, that would be amazing. Camila smiled. "I could drive you to the cinema after dinner, but I probably won't be able to pick you up after because I still have some more calls to make." After this whole ordeal, she would be happy to not even look at a phone again for at least a whole week. Not that that was realistic, but a woman could dream. "Are you okay with taking the bus back home?" "Sure!" Luz was way too excited about being allowed to go to the cinema with Amity to care. And she was used to taking the bus a lot anyway, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. Luz threw her arms around her mom. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you!" When she suggested it to Amity during dinner, she immediately agreed, still really stressed out from the situation she was in, but also at least a bit excited to do something like this with Luz. The cinema hall wasn't exactly packed when they got there. It was a weeknight, so it wasn't too surprising. So Amity and Luz had little issues making their way to their seats. Amity was amazed at how large the screen was. Sure, there were magical theaters on the bowling aisles, but her parents had never let her see an Azora movie in one of them. They were too childish and cheesy and did nothing to further Amity's academic progress, so they forbidden her from wasting snails and hours of her life seeing them. As a result, she'd only ever seen them in her secret hideout at the library on one of the tiny crystal balls that were available there, way after they'd been first released, narrowly avoiding spoilers each time. Her siblings had tried to convince her to sneak out and see whatever she wanted, multiple times, but she'd never budged. She'd been too scared of what would happen if she was caught. She'd missed out on so much because she'd been scared. But in this case, it meant she got to see her first big screen Azora movie with Luz. So maybe she was okay with that. The seats were surprisingly comfortable, and since Luz had applied another spell to Amity's injury right before they left, she would actually be able to focus on the movie rather than the pain in her back that resurfaced whenever the spells wore off. Luz put Amity's drink in a cup holder next to her and put the bag of popcorn she had bought down between them. "You should try some. It tastes best when it's still warm." I don't know. I'm not that hungry. I mean, we just had dinner and..." Amity was hesitant because everything inside her was guiltily yelling, "That belongs to Luz, not to you, and she already paid for your drink." But it was really hard to say no when Luz looked at her like this. "Come on, try it!" She was nudged gently. "I'm sure you'll like it." Amity gave in. "More popcorn?" Luz whispered about 30 minutes into the movie when Amity hadn't reached into the bag for a while, holding it towards her friend, who shook her head. The look in her eyes, however, said something entirely different. "Come on, I insist." Amity bit her lip. Like a lot of human food she'd tried in the last couple of days, this popcorn stuff tasted sweet and extremely good, and she really liked the way it melted in her mouth. It wasn't that she didn't want more, but you paid for it. She felt bad enough for staying with Luz and her mom and being an extra mouth to feed for them. But this was too much. Trying the food was one thing, but actively eating more of it felt like she was being greedy. Luz raised an eyebrow. Yeah, and you paid for how many of my snacks over the summer? Let me treat you for once, dang it. Her smile made Amity's defenses melt away, and she almost broke down in tears. Luz was the kindest person she'd ever met. How does someone like her deserve to have a girl like that in her life? Okay. She extended her hand and hesitatingly grabbed the popcorn bag again, lips forming into a smile. Luz beamed at her. Amity trying new human foods and liking them always brought her joy. Every little smile she got out of Amity after how hard the last few days had been was a small, beautiful victory. Luz took another small palmful of popcorn for herself when Amity offered the bag to her a bit later, but then handed it right back to her. Keep it. I think I've had enough for now. Will those two ever shut up? The guy in the row behind them grumbled at the person he was sitting with, loud enough for the two girls to hear, probably on purpose. I could barely hear the movie over all their talking. Luz was about to turn around and apologize when a female voice replied, Oh, be quiet, Jonah. They're adorable. I wish I had a girlfriend like that. The voice let out a dreamy sigh. Luz was so surprised by what she just heard that she almost choked on her popcorn. She could feel her cheeks heat up, her heart fluttering in her chest at the thought. But she couldn't bring herself to look over to see Amity's reaction. Instead, she cleared her throat awkwardly and was very, very focused on the movie all of a sudden. Why did the thought of someone assuming she and Amity were girlfriends make her so stupidly nervous, yet so stupidly happy at the same time? Amity's face was just as red as Luz's. She was pretty sure she almost passed out, trying to keep herself from squealing as she hugged the popcorn to her chest. Someone thinks Luz and I are girlfriends? Girlfriends? Feeling a bit bold all of a sudden, Amity reached for Luz's hand. Luz immediately reacted to the gesture, gently intertwining her fingers with Amity's. Until the movie ended, neither of them let go. That was so much fun! I can't believe they actually kissed! Luz squealed. That was a long time coming. It really was, Amity agreed, smiling. Although Luz's excitement made her even more happy than the kiss itself had, the pure delight on her face made Amity's heart race. There was nothing more precious in the entire universe. We'll get so many new ship fics now that they're officially a thing! When they left the cinema, the smell of wet pavement filled her nose, and the picture fit the scent. Oh, it's raining. It was somewhat heavy rain too. Luz was over the moon. It felt like ages since the last time she'd been able to feel rain on her skin, and she couldn't help but run out from under the cinema's roof that extended slightly onto the sidewalk. Amity, for whom the word rain equaled immediate danger, had a small heart attack. No, don't! She shrieked and immediately pulled her friend back under the safe cover of the building. What were you thinking? You could have gotten hurt! She pulled Luz into a hug, heart hammering in her chest. Luz suppressed a laugh, since obviously there was no way to actually get hurt by earth rain. Not that she was complaining about the hug, though. She returned it gently, putting her arms around Amity and waiting for her to calm down a bit before slowly letting go and explaining the situation to her. Our rain isn't like the rain on the bowling aisles. It's completely harmless. Look. She pointed at the other people walking around in the rain, completely unbothered by it. Amity blinked. Everyone walking around like that while it was raining, without any visible magic cover, was one of the weirdest, scariest things she'd ever seen. Really? She couldn't believe what Luz was saying. It wasn't that she didn't trust her, but growing up knowing the very thing that her friend was calling harmless here was deadly wasn't something she could just turn off. Yeah, Luz smiled at her softly. But thanks for looking out for me. I really appreciate it. Amity smiled back at her. Always. Then, Luz took off the jacket she was wearing and gently placed it around Amity's shoulders. Here, you take the jacket. It's waterproof. Maybe that will make you feel a bit safer. They have to walk through the rain at least for a bit, and she could imagine how scary that had to be for someone who was only used to the kind of rain they had on the boiling aisles. So, she would have done just about anything to help Amity feel a bit less scared. But she also really wanted to show her how great the rain was here. Luz loved the rain, and she wanted Amity to be able to experience it like she did. Amity gave her a concerned look. But what about you? The last thing she wanted was for Luz to get hurt. Luz chuckled and shrugged. I'll be fine. I actually really like feeling the rain on my skin. Amity continued to look at her skeptically. I can prove to you that it's not dangerous, if you'll let me. Just reach out into the rain and I promise it won't hurt you. Amity gulped. I don't think... Luz squeezed her hand. Don't be scared. I swear it's not dangerous. You know I'd never do anything to put you at risk, right? Amity looked into Luz's sparkling eyes, and she knew she would follow this girl to the ends of the world if she asked her to. I do. I trust you, she replied without a second of hesitation. Luz beamed, then got behind her, putting her arms around Amity and carefully cupping one of her friend's hands in her own to reach out from under the roof into the rain. It's going to be okay, I promise, she said soothingly. Amity could feel her friend's warm breath on her neck. Her heart was racing from Luz being so close. She resisted the urge to flinch back when Luz lifted her hands and tried to focus on the embrace instead. Amity closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Luz would never hurt me. Still, she couldn't help but brace herself for the pain that never came. After a moment, she felt a tickling sensation on her skin. When she opened her eyes again, she gasped, staring at the tiny drops of rain in her palm in amazement. See? Luz was still beaming at her, still holding Amity's hand cupped in both of hers. Wow, Amity breathed, completely in awe. It's so cold. Luz slowly let go of her, but never stopped smiling at her friend, reaching for Amity's hand when she stepped out from under the roof. Walk out into the rain with me? Amity was still hesitating, but this time it wasn't fear. It was her inability to tear herself from the picture of her crush standing there, in the middle of the rain. She was mesmerized. Eventually, Luz's hand in hers, she stepped out onto the sidewalk, bracing herself for pain once more. But with every step she took, she got less anxious. The rain slid off the jacket harmlessly. The drops that ran down her hands felt cold, but not painful. And there was something absolutely incredible about the sensation. This feels surreal, but also kind of amazing. I can imagine. Luz wasn't exactly sure what she was doing. They probably should have been heading home before she got completely soaked. But she couldn't bring herself to care. She hadn't even realized just how much she missed the rain here while she had been in the boiling aisles. And now she just wanted to enjoy it to the fullest. And make sure that Amity could do the same without fear. Not just because it was something she was hoping to make Amity happy with. Okay, admittedly, it was mainly that. Luz loved doing things for Amity that made her happy. But it was actually important in the sense that Amity really needed to learn it. If she was going to stay here for a couple of weeks, and with the weather probably being the kind of weather it always was in the beginning of September, this wouldn't be the last time she'd be confronted with rain. Luz knew just the place to take her. There's a small playground just a couple streets from where they were now. Like she'd assumed, it was completely abandoned because of the rain when they got there. She opened the door for Amity and grinned at her, bowing jokingly. After you, m'lady. Amity felt stupid for blushing at that. She should have gotten used to Luz's overly dramatic gestures over the summer, but for some reason, they still made her feel giddy every single time. Meanwhile, Luz was having a minor existential crisis because she was starting to question if all these little sentences she said directed at Amity in that one tone had been semi-intentional flirting. Why are we here? Right, back to the task at hand. Luz took a deep breath, pushed these thoughts into the back of her mind for later, and followed Amity onto the playground. Her bold smile from earlier replaced by a far shyer one. Rain's really common here in fall. People would look at you strangely if they realized you were afraid of it. So I thought maybe we should connect a positive memory to it. She closed the door of the fence behind her and walked into the middle of the playground where it was nothing but grass in between two goals for soccer. She extended a hand towards Amity. Dance with me? And just like that, they were twirling each other around on the playground in the middle of the rain, slowly, careful to take it easy because of Amity's injury, and without any of the magic their grom dance had held. But magic all the same. By the time they stopped, Luz was soaked to the bone. But Amity's breathless laughter made everything more than worth it. That was so much fun! Maybe this realm's rain really wasn't so bad. Amity's laughing. The realization hit Luz very suddenly, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since her call with the twins, Amity was laughing again. Luz was so happy that she twirled her friend around one more time just for the heck of it. And then she tossed her arms around her and pulled her close. Amity was so surprised by that she stumbled backwards, just barely able to steady herself when she returned the hug. What was that for? I'm just really glad you're feeling a bit better. Well, it's because of you, so thank you, Luz. Amity stared at her hesitantly for a moment, then pressed a quick kiss to Luz's cheek. For everything. No problem! Now Luz was the one with the squeaky voice for once, trying desperately not to think of that thank you cheek kiss as anything more than just that, while simultaneously trying not to pass out. You didn't have to, we should probably head home now, she stuttered, extremely flustered. I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to. Amity smiled to herself, very proud of herself for the large step of progress. That, despite not quite being confession, was more than she'd expected to be able to do today. Or anytime soon, honestly. And despite Amity being pretty sure that Luz hadn't realized the kiss was meant to be romantic, but counting her reaction as a good sign, and despite Luz wanting it to be romantic, but not daring to hope, someone you liked liking you back was something that only happened in fanfics and movies after all. Both of them were walking on clouds all the way to the bus stop. Luz and Amity could hear Camila's voice from another room, basically as soon as Luz unlocked the door. It was easy to tell that she was extremely annoyed, and not in a very good mood from the way she was speaking, although neither of the girls understood much of what she said before they opened the door to the living room. You better! Camila groaned audibly as she hung up. Dios mío, what a bunch of incompetent idiots! She shook her head for a moment, then put the phone back into the charging station for the first time in almost 2 hours inside. That wasn't how she imagined spending her second day off. But it was fine. It was good that at least that was sorted out now. Well, that sounded like a pleasant phone call, Luz commented when she and Amity entered the room. Hi, Mom. Her mother turned around towards the two girls. Welcome home, you two. She smiled at them, her mood instantly improving somewhat, then gestured towards the phone inside. Well, apparently, the person in charge of looking into Amity's identity yesterday was an intern in his first week. And guess what? If you have a person checking for personal information that actually knows how the freaking database works, finding her isn't an issue. She covered her eyes with her hand for a moment, then shrugged and looked back at the girls. But since we got that sorted out, at least she'll be able to go to school with you tomorrow. And she should have a replacement passport in 1 or 2 weeks. Oh, that's great, Luz said, as surprised as she was confused, because she wasn't sure how exactly Amity could be in an American database, since she didn't exist in this realm. But glad that this has somehow worked itself out, even when it really shouldn't have. That was something she should probably note and question at a later date, preferably when her mom wasn't around. Amity smiled at Camila. Thank you for making such an effort for me. You didn't have to do that. Maybe not, but I wanted to. Camila smiled, shook her head, and decided to focus on other things than endless bureaucracy-related phone calls, namely, on how much Amity was smiling. After everything that had happened, that was a fantastic sign. How was the movie? It was wonderful, Luz said with a huge grin on her face. They'd spent the whole way home discussing it, and she still hadn't processed that her ship was finally canon, which still made her incredibly excited. But all of that paled in comparison to the fact that Amity was finally able to laugh again. And Luz couldn't even decide if the rain, the maybe romantic but probably not kiss, or the hand holding and being mistaken as Amity's girlfriend had been her second favorite part of the evening. Okay, so maybe she was a bit in love with her friend. Or very. Everything she'd realized about herself and the way that she acted around Amity and thought about her since she'd had that conversation with her mom made it pretty much impossible to deny that. The thought made her nervous, scared her even, and she wasn't sure what she was going to do about it, if she was going to do anything. At least, it wouldn't be anytime soon. But it was kinda nice to finally be able to place the butterflies in her stomach. It really was. It was a great movie. Also, Luz did everything she could to cheer me up, and she did a really great job. I'm eternally grateful for having her in my life. Amity smiled softly at Luz, looking at her with so much love in her eyes that Luz almost melted, and she was sure her heart had just skipped several beats. I'm so happy to have you in my life too, Luz smiled shyly, then had to turn away and face her mom in order to fight the overwhelming urge to just walk right over to Amity and kiss her. They'd had a great evening. She wasn't about to screw that up with her impulsive behavior. We had a lot of fun together. This was a great idea. Thank you so much, Mommy. Luz hugged her mother, and Camila hugged her right back after suppressing the shriek she almost let out when her daughter touched her. Luz's clothes were so wet that they left wet spots where she touched her mom. Mija, you're completely soaked. Luz rubbed the back of her neck and chuckled awkwardly. Whoops! Sorry. Camila looked at her daughter, then at Amity, who, while not being quite as soaked as Luz, hadn't stayed completely dry either. No need to apologize, but please go shower and change immediately, both of you. Camila felt bad about not being able to pick them up now. She hadn't realized how bad the weather was. But the 2 phone calls she'd gotten in the last hour had also been really important to get at least something sorted out for Amity. So even if she had realized it, she wouldn't have been able to make it. Okay, Amity can go shower first, Luz replied immediately, like the gentlewoman her mom had raised her to be. I'll make us some tea in the meantime. After I've changed, she added at her mom's strict, but mostly just concerned, glance. Camila shook her head. Don't worry about the tea, I can do that. Please, just go change while your friend showers, okay, Carlino? She ruffled her daughter's wet hair. And maybe go find a towel for your hair. Luz smiled at her and hugged her again. Despite her still very wet clothes, her mother didn't complain. She just hugged her back and the 2 of them remained that way for a bit, neither of them moving. It was weird, but it felt like they were a lot closer now than they'd been just a few days ago, despite the fact that not much had changed between them. Okay, got it. Thanks, Mom. Luz wouldn't have admitted it out loud, but she was actually freezing. Today had been among the colder days of early September, and in combination with the cold wind she'd been exposed to outside until a couple of minutes ago, the cold wet clothes that stuck to her body were really getting to her. Despite that, she didn't regret anything. This had been tons of fun, and doing it with Amity had been even better. Amity had already disappeared up the stairs by now. Maybe because she'd been getting cold herself, or because she felt out of place, or maybe a mix of both of these things. Amity came back downstairs and borrowed pajamas a while later. She gave Luz, who was now dressed in fresh and significantly less wet clothes, a quick nod, causing her to disappear up the stairs to take a shower of her own. Amity, meanwhile, sat down on the couch. A moment later, Camila entered the room with 2 steaming cups of tea in hand. Luz told me you really like wild berry tea, so I made one of those. I hope that's okay. She put the cup that was meant for Luz down on the table, then handed the other one to Amity. Are you feeling any better? Amity managed a smile when she took the cup from Camila. The warm porcelain felt nice against her skin. The tea smelled and tasted as good as it always did. I am, actually. Thanks to you and Luce. You've been so kind to me these last couple of days, and you barely even know me. She awkwardly took another sip, awkwardly staring into the cup instead of looking Camila in the eyes. Anytime, Amity. And like I said, if you need someone to talk to when Luce isn't around, or for things that you can't talk to Luce about, I'm here. Amity almost started crying. She couldn't remember the last time she felt so genuinely protected and cared for by an adult, which in itself was kind of telling. Sure, her teachers liked her as a student, but that wasn't the same thing. And even Lilith, who she admired so much, had gone behind her back when she'd put the power glyph on Amity at the convention. She felt really conflicted about that for a while afterwards, and these feelings had started resurfacing after Emerald used Lilith's voice to cause Amity's confidence to slump. But since she was very far away from having to face her again at the moment, there was no use in dwelling on these feelings. Thank you, Miss Nocetta. I really appreciate that. The kinder the woman was to her, the more conflicted she felt about all the lies they told her. Luce was right. This world was very different from the Bowling Isles, and Amity wasn't sure if Camila would have understood or liked the concept of her daughter learning to use magic. Not to mention the fact that she'd faced off against several different types of monsters all summer. So she understood why Luce didn't want to tell her, and maybe she was right about this not being a good time to do it. But Amity couldn't imagine someone who had taken in a stranger, basically no questions asked, doing anything to purposely take away the sparkle in her daughter's eyes. Maybe Amity's relationship with her own parents was too far broken to ever be fixed. But even with how little she'd seen of the relationship between Luce and her mother in the last few days, she was almost certain that this could be. You don't have to thank me for that. Luce's mom gave Amity a warm smile, but what she said next made Amity's blood run cold. Oh, I almost forgot to mention this, but your sister called earlier and promised to send over your legal documents as soon as she can. So we should hopefully have a lot of things sorted out very, very soon. My sister called? Amity was really certain that shouldn't have been possible. Since she hadn't talked to the twins since the incident on the previous Sunday, she couldn't know for sure what her siblings had been up to. But as far as she knew, communication between human devices and witch devices was impossible. And even if they hadn't been, there was no way her siblings could have figured out the right phone number. What's going on here? End of Chapter 9.